As we know, you had been invited to the funeral, but you've been up talking to some of the guests after the service. Who
yes,
have you
well,
been talking
when
to?
we finished, when all the guests went in, I slipped into the back and I sat beside Pat Jennings, Frank McClintock, the old Arsenal player, and Martin O'Neill. And I was speaking, I shook hands with Dickie on the way out, and they're very tearful. Callum's very tearful. Angie gave me a smile. They're all full of emotion. I spoke to Alex afterwards, and she wasn't that keen to do an interview because she's choked up, and obviously, and you have to respect that on a day like this. But I was speaking to Sven, who's in very fine form, and I think this Swedish gentleman is completely taken aback by all of this. I don't know what he said in the interview, I didn't hear it, but he said he's never quite seen a service like that, and how moving it was.
And it was a beautiful service, a mixture of some of George's favourite songs, Vincent, for example, some old traditional Abide With Me, and I mentioned it earlier, when Callum spoke, the two poems he read out.
Well,
very emotional.
The Best family and George should be very proud of Callum. As I said earlier, he's just 24, he's lost his dad, and to get up there, I mean, I couldn't have spoken at my mother's funeral 4 years ago. I couldn't do that, and I'm an adult. And well done to him, and Barbara as well. They broke down occasionally, but that's only natural. But I'm looking at people when Brian Kennedy was singing Vincent. I mean, there were women just in front of me in tears, and it was a very moving service in beautiful surroundings. And I thought Peter Corey and Brian Kennedy as local boys, they did us proud. Their singing was magnificent. I thought the Professor was also lovely, his tribute. And I thought it was nice that he paid tribute to the work George was doing in return for liver research and so on.
And a bit of humour there, Bobby McAlinton, a
yes,
great friend of his from the Vesties
right.
Bar in California. And as we can see, Jackie, the hearse still making its way. People giving him more rounds of applause. A lovely tribute. You're talking about women in tears. There were men in tears as well, I saw in the service, and a lot of people lining the route, tears in their eyes too.
Oh yes, but those men have grown up like me, and I'm 3 years older than Bestie. And your idols are supposed to be older than you, but he was one of my idols. We all wanted to play like him, we all wanted to look like him. So those men will reflect on those days, the swinging 60s, when George had everything. Sadly, because of his alcoholism, his illness, he didn't have everything. And that took away a great deal from his life. But I can tell you, apart from a few weeks, and I've known George a long time, he enjoyed every minute of his life. Make no mistake about that.
Jackie, thank you for that. For now, back to Tara.
Well, Donna, the police have been giving us some final figures of the numbers that were actually inside the grounds of Stormont, and that was 25,000. Of course, that's not including the people who lined the streets. But among the 25,000, these gentlemen and this young lady who are joining me now, what did you think about today? How do you feel now?
I thought it was a great standoff he had, and the people from Belfast and Northern Ireland came out in this weather to pay their grievances to George and his family.
What did you think of the service? You got to see it on the big screen.
I thought the service, all the ones that spoke about him, spoke highly of him, and it was a lovely service.
Very moving. Can I ask you what you thought of, for instance, George Best's sister? She was very brave to be able to say the words she did.
She did. She was very, very, very brave, and she was. She said everything anybody would say. I cried my eyes out too. Like this is my wee daughter here, and I just don't know really what to say. No, it was brilliant.
No, you definitely braved the elements. Do you think it was worth it?
Yes, definitely.
Why? You just felt you wanted to be here? Did you want
just to show respect.
And to have something to remember?
We're members of Carrickfergus Manchester United Supporters Club, and that's the big flag, that's the big lily there they had around the hotel, you know, and that part of the Man United thing was nice to us to have here for his funeral, you know. And
it was an opportunity as well, I suppose, for Northern Ireland to show how much George Best meant to us.
Oh yes, well anybody good like that coming from your own country says it all, like, you know, and the Northern Ireland people come out in their droves today to respect that, you know.
Thanks very much indeed. I'll not keep you out in the rain any longer. Thank you very much. And it's back to Donna.
Well, as the crowds make their way out of the Stormont Estate, I'm joined by the Secretary of State, Peter Hain. You're so used to being inside that building for very different reasons. What was it like in the Great Hall today for you?
Well, I don't think anybody there will ever experience anything like that again. It was a joyous, a beautiful occasion, one which had a spontaneity about it and a common humanity about it, which I suppose is what we remember George best for. And the way it united people, the family, it was their service, it was run the way they wanted to. When they asked me to put it into Stormont, I was absolutely delighted to do so because it was the obvious, sensible thing to do.
Are you a football fan yourself?
Well, I am. I'm a Chelsea fan of over 40 years standing, and I remember seeing George just destroy our defence. Defenders like Chopper Harris, our hard man, Eddie McCready, he'd run rings around them. And you know, as a fan, as a fanatic, you actually wanted to cheer him doing it. I can't think of any other player that I've ever wanted to do that to, and you clapped him when he did it, as he destroyed your team. I don't think there's anybody ever to have graced the football field like George did, and we'll always treasure that. But what came through in this funeral service today was something else, really. Here was the person, the warm person to his friends and his family, and the support he gave them, and everybody from his sister right through to his surgeon who cared for him in the final hours said that this was an exceptional human being. And I suppose if I take away from this something to treasure, it is that whatever our differences, whatever our politics, whatever our religion, what George best expressed best was that we're human beings, our common humanity, and that's what came shining through the ceremony.
Yes, he certainly brought people together, especially during the rough times of the Troubles. This has been a lovely tribute for George today, but people have been talking over the last week about a lasting tribute and memorials, some sort of a personal, permanent tribute from the people of Northern Ireland. What do you think that should be?
Well, I understand that, and I want to look at that and consult with others, including his family, because people have said today in their tens of thousands here at Stormont in this very rainy and unpleasant weather, and lining the streets in their tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands in Belfast, that he has a special person, one of our favourite sons, and we will want to remember him.
Secretary of State, thank you for joining us. Noah.
Thank you.
Donna, thank you very much indeed. Just saw one of the helicopters flying through the shot there. Now, just another comment here. No respect to Sir Matt Busby, obviously, but if only George had been under Fergie as a teenager, his talent would have been around for years. Norman, it's often said that because George was the first footballing superstar, no one knew how to handle it, how to protect him, how to deal with it. Did you find, 15 years later, were there any processes, any structures in place to protect a young player?
No, I think Sir Matt Busby did a magnificent job, and George was just George. Let's put it that way. And if he wanted to go and do something and press the destruct button, then that was what he wanted to do. But on the football sense, Sir Matt brought George through. I thought he'd done a great job for George.
But so you don't feel it's the club's duty to look after his sort of out of hours activities, or a little bit of guidance, perhaps, shall we say? I mean, you've been through this yourself.
I don't think so. I think you're man enough and you're old enough. You have to take some responsibility for your own actions.
What do you think, Lindsay?
Well, I think really at that particular time it was a one-off, and maybe the culture of football was a little bit different in those days than it is today. It's all changed of dietitians, the agents and all looking after them, maybe not so much in those days. And I think really George, as we all said, he was a one-off, and he would have done his own thing anyway. I don't think there would have been anybody born capable of telling George best what to do.
But when you look now, the Beckham's a world brand, I mean, George would have, well, is, I mean, by default, but would have been if the biggest brand in the world.
There's no doubt about that, and what Norman said, the problem is that George, money didn't make any difference to him. He just wanted to play football, and if you see some of the older footage, George is kicking the ball about on his own, and that's probably what he enjoyed doing.
Well, many stars there, of course. One of them we saw pictures in Stormont was Eddie Irvine, our favourite Formula One racing driver. This is what he had to say.
I was watching it last night on TV. It was incredible, all them little tricks and things. If I could have done with a car what he could do with a ball, Michael Schumacher wouldn't have won a world championship, that's for sure.
One of the great quotes from George, of course, was if I'd been born ugly, you'd never have heard of Pele. I mean, this tremendous belief in his own ability.
He made an awful lot of men very jealous. Let's put it that way. If you were in a nightclub with George Best, then you might as well moved on. You know, we looked at the pictures there of Dennis Law. I thought it was a great moment when one of the guys was singing there, and I think it was Peter Corey, and he had just gone into his own little world with the eyes closed and the head swaying side to side. And he was taking in moments, obviously, that he had spent with George, and maybe having a glass of beer after one of the matches or whatever. He had gone into his own world there and was thinking really nice thoughts.
As we watch the hearse with its coffin making its way to Roselawn here, it's going to turn up the Ballygowan Road off the dual carriageway there, and still people at the side of the road, people who perhaps went into their house or turned on a radio to hear what was going on. And as I say, this is being broadcast around the world, but those people have come out and are still there.
I think Bob Bishop is in Roselawn as well, isn't he? Bob Bishop. So that's touching as well.
Yeah,
I always remember Bob Bishop when I was going across all the time to Old Trafford, and he always carried this little letter in his wallet or in his back pocket, and it was a letter that George wrote to him. And apparently George, if he hadn't been in football, which he was always going to be, would have been a sign writer, and he had like, sort of like italics or calligraphy. And he had this beautiful, beautiful letter that George had written to him, and he always kept it, and he showed every schoolboy that went over there, George Best wrote this to me, and he wouldn't part with it for the world. I thought that was lovely.
George's dad was never entirely confident that football was going to be his career, and he never pushed him into it, but he had this job lined up for a printer's plant, and he kept that for quite a long time until George had that contract firmly in his pocket for a few weeks, because he never was entirely convinced that, not that George lacked the talent, but that it would happen. And of course it's not always, well, talent will out, I suppose. But so that could have been, and as George said, considering all the work he's given to printers through the years, it was quite fitting.
He could have opened his own printers.
Well, I think so, yeah. I mean, a number of books, of course, autobiographies, and he certainly produced a lot of print and inspired a lot of print. But one of the things that the family was saying to me this week was that, they across all these years, and listen to the applause there as we pass by a substantial group of people still applauding, that there was so much in the press about George, and so much of it they knew was malicious.
Well, that's the problem whenever you're in the spotlight. It's the press will write whatever they want on a lot of occasions. They mightn't even have been in a club, they mightn't even have been in a bar. And it's just because it sells newspapers. Anything with George Best's name on it, that'll sell newspapers.
Just watching, Lindsay, the cars have just turned off the carriageway and they've turned up the Ballygowan Road now, just up the hill, and Roselawn just a short distance away from there. But the family always did resent that. I mean, Dickie even said in the last few days they were talking about how often or how seldom he'd been over to the hospital to see George, and he went as often as he could, 3 or 4 times in the last couple of weeks alone, until the last time when he stayed. There's always been that, raise him up and knock him down.
Well, that's it. Someone mentioned in the programme earlier about the 5th Beatle, and George was the first real sporting superstar, and that's what the press did. They just built him up and built him up, and rightly so, because he was the best. And then all of a sudden things started going wrong, and they just kept chopping him down all the time.
A lot of people gathered at the bottom of the Ballygowan Road there. Those are the biggest crowds since we've left Stormont. But let's go back to Stormont and Donna.
Yes, Noel, with me now is Eamon Holmes, who introduced the ceremony today. Many's a broadcast under your belt. How difficult was that, Eamon, because such a fan of George's as well?
It was very emotional, Donna. You think you're in control. You think, well, you sort of know what you're going to say, until the coffin came right up there in front of me, and it was wet from the rain and the flowers were there. And then I looked down and I saw the personal tributes from sisters, and it was, and then you think, you say, why am I standing here? Why am I doing this? And I had to explain. The family asked me, I'm sure a lot of people are saying, what's he doing standing there? And I just like to think, I was representing football fans and people in Northern Ireland, and it was a tremendous privilege. But of all the gigs I get, if I was ever to get a CBE